Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while he was helping me with my Japanese homework, did really well after that. BTW. But after that class, we kinda drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I'm crossing the street in Kyoto and I hear my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart we meet again. We got some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No. His hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. Edit, my first gold. Thank you kind internet stranger. I met a Canadian guy while on holiday in South America and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. They got talking. Turns out they were from the same small town in Canada. Had the same type of brain cancer and had been operated on by the same surgeon. Started dating this girl a few weeks ago. We get to talking about where we live etc. She lives in not only the same building but exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so ducking bizarre walking into my old apartment that I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We play Halo, watch movies, act, and he was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency and never got his contact information. I didn't even remember his name a decade later, but I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job, carpooling with someone from my training class. And one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car as he was going to take the car after we got off at work and use it for the night. He introduces us. I turn around. And in the backseat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately. And now live together. He's my best friend. For sure. And the godfather to my children. Went to college. Met a cute girl. Where'd you go to high school? She asks. You've never heard of it? I reply. I grew up in a town of 1,200 people. Graduated in a class of about 90. Try me, she says. And that was the beginning of finding out that not only had she heard of it, she had almost attended it because her family had lived in one of the neighboring towns very briefly when she was growing up. We shared dozens of mutual friends and had apparently spent our young lives narrowly missing each other. Later, after we started dating, we learned that one of our mutual friends had been trying to set us up with each other for years. She was overwhelmed with laughter when she saw that we were finally together, completely without her involvement. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We went out to dinner with our parents so they could finally meet. Her folks arrive at the restaurant and see mine. Her mom goes, "Oh hey, my dad's name. So this is your son, huh?" They had been co-workers years ago. Of course. We've been married for 11 years now. Got a good thing going. We intend to keep it. Edit, I'm so glad you all enjoyed this. I love talking about my wife and have tons of wholesome stories like this. We do well because we each feel like we're the lucky one. Enjoy your day. Edit 2. By request of several commenters I am adding one of my favorite stories of my wife and I in a comment below. It is a much cuter story. Please enjoy. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do and it was close to the end of the year I guess. So she goes to the big Cupo board in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam. So we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative. etc. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There's 3 examples, ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2, and I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading, and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much a fly will get in your mouth." In the exact moment a fly flew into my mouth. Was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country, about 6,000 miles away, with a work colleague. And the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, "I think you're talking about my son." Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mum pictures of our trip. The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do except she has no way of knowing. I wear a blue sweater. She wears a blue sweater. I bring leftover spaghetti. She brings leftover spaghetti. It is so weird, I almost hate her. I've mentioned this before on Reddit, so I'll just copy paste. But definitely the Shadow D incident. One night in university I was fooling around with my then GF and noticed that the brightness of the TV caused us to cast distinct shadows on the wall behind us. Being 19 and a fool, I took this opportunity to take a pic, using Snapchat, of the shadow my erectee made on the wall and sent the pic to my best friend. I thought it would elicit an interesting reaction but could not have prepared for what was next. You see, on Snapchat you can see when someone receives your message as well as when it's opened. So as my message is sending, still unopened by him, I receive a Snapchat from my best friend. I open it and lo and behold, what do I see? A Shadow D snap. This man decided at the exact same time that I did to send an identical pic of his D shadow on the wall. Both of our GFs were confused, thinking it was some inside joke, when in reality we had never spoken of or sent Shadow D's ever before. TLDR. Decided to snap a pic of my D shadow to my best friend at the exact same time he decided to do the same. Edit. It's cool guys. We said no homo. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later my father decided to put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city, because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with 2 other guys, which one of them is still my best friend Toady. When I first visited that friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we did, not much of a coincidence, as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same Duckine house. OFC, I couldn't remember our old house. So I called my father to confirm that it's the same address, and it turns out that he very briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Edit. I hate you, and Toady says I'm totally right with that. I have an uncommon last name and a not too common first name. I was in the hospital for a surgery and the person in the next room was there for the same surgery. Come to find out that we were second cousins and never knew that the other existed. He had the same name as me and his wife had the same name as my wife. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places, in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking, so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. I wanted my husband to accompany me down to the parking garage in our building to grab something from our car. He was already in his PJ pants and didn't want to come. I convinced him no one would see us, and he reluctantly agreed. We got on the elevator and rode down 1 floor before it stopped to let someone on. The largest, buffest man steps into the elevator wearing his own PJ pants. He said nothing, but gave my husband the dude head nod before getting off on the main floor and disappearing forever. We've never seen him since. Both of my grandfathers were named William and both grandmothers were named Joyce. Back in the early mid-90s the phone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long distance in-state call. We're a small state with only 1 area code. One morning I woke up to the phone ringing, and when I picked up I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice, We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in a different part of the state, but the number must have been off by only one digit from the one she tried to call. To add to the coincidence, I had overslept and would have been late for work if she hadn't called me and woken me up. Had a kidney transplant last year. Nurse makes a comment about it having my name on it. He elaborated to say that the donor has the same surname as me. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as it I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Was at the dentist getting a crown extension. Dentist, hey. You were born on the 13th of July. So was I. Assistant, me too. We all shared a look of surprise and longing with each other. Longing to be closer. Then they drilled the absolute duck out of my teeth. Edit, oh god. It's happening again. I've had several small world experiences, but the biggest was talking to a girl after my first university class and discovering through the course of a 2-hour-long conversation that our grandmothers had been each other's maid of honor and my aunt and her mom were best friends since childhood. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. 2 of my great-grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great-grandfather's house. An officer from a different PD was showing me a picture of a guy they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I looked up from the computer, I see Pit riding by on a bike, literally 5 feet away from the squad car. When I was 18 I dated a girl who went to private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought okay great. It'll be a nice night. She told me that only boys from a specific boys' private school were allowed to come because of an incident once when they let everyone in. Some girl got really drunk and puked on the headmaster's shoes, so they limited it to one boys' school after that. Fast forward 12 years and I'm with my fiancée, different girl, at a wedding shower. I overhear my wife, I was so embarrassed when I puked on the headmaster's shoes. I yelled, that was you? That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous. TLDR, my wife cock-blocked me 12 years before we met. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he had also just left my small hometown. Last summer, I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time. So we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 PM on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college. I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a Grindr date. The 3 of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that 3 friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. Knew a girl in high school that was just the worst type of person. Take too long to explain all the reasons, but a big one is that she tried to drive a wedge between my bestie and I. She moved away after high school. My friend and I would bring her up occasionally and talk about some of her worst qualities and say how glad we were that we never had to see her again. One time, as we were doing so in a restaurant, suddenly she appeared right next to our table. She'd come back to visit someone and just happened to be right where we were right as we were discussing her. So awkward. It was 5 minutes of awkward and then she left and we just sat there like daft. My old work ran a secret Santa once the week before Christmas. It was a $10 limit and the person I was buying for I didn't know very well. I left my buying to the last minute because I just didn't know what to get her. So I was in town and walking past some shops when lo and behold, I see an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the second-hand bookstore. It just called to me. So I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the cost and guess what? $10 perfect. So come the day of the secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts. Some 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye I see some people crowding around a woman who is crying. I keep listening and people are calling out for the person who was a Santa. I go over and reveal that it was me. The lady I had bought for was crying and hugged me. She said 10 years ago her house burned down along with all her possessions. The book that I bought her was her favorite and also the exact same edition, so had the exact same cover she remembered. Because it was a second-hand book, it was even weathered in the same places she remembered. So it was as if I'd grabbed the book off a shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. Me and my partner were looking for a car. We wanted a Subaru Impreza and found one for our price range on our street that had my 3-letter initials for its license plate. The seller was a high school friend of my partner. I had a dream that me and my friend ran into Biggie Smalls. He was alive in the dream world, and he invited us to a party that was on that night. We decided that we were going to buy Biggie a gift, and I suggest that we get him a water dragon, a big lizard, because Biggie would look dope rocking a water dragon on his shoulder. We started walking to the party with the lizard and we were at the local park. I looked down next to a bench and there was a Snaplock bag with white powder. We took the white powder and partied with Biggie that night. The next day I wake up and go to make a coffee. I turn on the radio and Party and Bullet is playing. I thought it was a strange coincidence considering I had a dream about Biggie but thought nothing too much of it. I walked out and froze. On my porch was a water dragon. A water dragon might appear around my house maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I spoke to my mate later that day and told him about the dream and joked that I might find a bag of coke later that day. Sure enough, I am walking to my mate's house at night and humor the idea. So I walk over to the bench and found a bag of coke exactly where I'd dreamt it would be. I definitely disposed of the bag though. Me and my friends definitely hypothetically did not snort the coke while playing Biggie Smalls songs all night and into the morning having the best time of our lives. That would be preposterous.